Hello and welcome to The Found Cause, where we found our cause and serve the Lord Jesus Christ. I'm Michael, the man on top of the table, and to my left is...
Theodore on a couch.
Theodore on a couch. Put the mic up to your face, Theodore. Let the people know how you feel.
Theodore on a couch.
And
I'm feeling like I'm on a couch.
Good. I'm on a table. And Sebastian is to my right.
And I'm on a recliner.
Yeah. Wow, our intro is really off kilter because today, as you might notice from the three mics, it is once again a rare episode where all three of us are in an episode together. And to do that, we have had to, what do you call this, improvising, and me sitting on a table like some sort of Stellarite monk. So I promise you I'm not superior to my two fellows here, but I am their wise old teacher. Today's episode, we're going to skip weird intros because we didn't think of one, and I'm already sitting on a table, and that's intro enough. We're going to talk about a weirder thing than Michael sitting on a table in between two boys.
What could be weirder than that?
It is weird prophecies about Jesus. Was Jesus a copy of other Near Eastern or Western religions? So that's the topic for today. It's a pretty common one. If you've ever seen the movie Zeitgeist, I saw it in college. Some girls wanted to show it to me because I was a well-known Christian, I guess, in their eyes. They wanted to see my thoughts on it. I only saw a brief portion of it, but because it goes into a lot of stuff like Bush did 9/11 and other crazy conspiracies. But it is a conspiracy movie that spawned a very popular atheist argument against Christianity, and that is that Jesus was a copy of other religions. And so he's not A, real, and B, not even unique. He's a copied myth, much like other myths copy each other all the time. So we're going to dive into first the argument in particular and how it shapes up and what specifically it says he's copying from different places. Two, we're going to look at those places that Zeitgeist and others that propose that kind of idea copy that Jesus is copying, and see how similar they are. Three, we're going to go into Jesus prophecies, so prophecies about Jesus from the Bible itself, to show that the foregone conclusion here is that no, Jesus is not a copy of those false religions. In fact, he was prophesied from long ago, from ancient days, and so he wasn't a spot-on moment, spur of the moment kind of creation from monks of the time. In fact, he was prophesied long ago and fulfills those messianic prophecies, so certainly not a copy. And then fourth, we're going to talk about how the Bible was compiled in the first place and why it's really unreasonable by nature that he would even have been a copied story at all, or some mythology. So, with all that being said, am I missing anything, or can I jump into Zeitgeist the movie?
Jump in.
Dive right in.
All right, so if you're ever wondering or curious, I'm pretty sure Zeitgeist is free somewhere on the internet. That could be a lie, and you have to go to some illegal site. I don't know. I saw it in college, which means it probably was on an illegal site because I wasn't paying attention. But you can buy it for like $3 on YouTube or Amazon or wherever you get your movies if you want to follow along. Like I said, I think only the first 30 minutes talk about Jesus, but here's the general argument. And it's not just a Zeitgeist movie, because if you've never heard of Zeitgeist, you've probably heard this argument before, because it is a common atheist argument that was just popularized by the movie. The argument goes like this. Way back in the day, everybody was creating their own religions, right, like people do, and Jews of the time thought they needed to create a more people-centered Judaism, one that was more approachable, didn't have a high priest, and one that was going to become a popular movement throughout the empire. So, well post Jesus' death period, 30 AD, in fact, into the 100s, when Christians first started getting persecuted in the Roman Empire, there came to be a cabal of people who conspired to write several letters that would create a new man to rally around, a new Jewish figure to rally around he was Jewish by nature, so he could pull in Jews, but wasn't actually Jewish, and therefore their religion could be reformed to be more popular in the empire and all that, and then eventually to get money and power and all the things people did make religions. So these authors, this cabal, needed to find common motifs that they knew were popular amongst people to create their story. And so they looked to other myths. So there was a couple of popular cults in the Roman Empire at the time, like 100 AD and pre-Christ too. Some of them include, and the movie will give you a long list, and if you go look up on Wikipedia, like, is Jesus a copy of other religions, and they give you the list, it's a long one. And it goes a little something like this. Horus, born on December 25th, resurrected and called savior of his people, led disciples. And then it'll say Mithra, born on December 23rd, virgin birth, led a company of 12 disciples. Some Hindu goddess, born on December 25th, led a company of 12 disciples, called the way, the truth, the light. A bunch of similarities to Jesus, and it'll go on and on and on. Spoiler alert to some of those things, it is almost entirely inaccurate. It's not giving you truthful information about what these gods are. Not only the background stories about them and how they aren't different, but also people like Mithra was not born on December 25th. They honestly just pulled that out of nowhere. It's from an early 1800s. In the
1800s. It's where all the wild stuff started happening.
Yeah. So this doesn't have this whole talk that people created Jesus out of other religions started happening in the 1800s, and a lot of skepticism was coming out of Germany and France and England. They started questioning whether Babylon was even a real city, and this is one of the many things where they would write pieces talking about other religions, and they weren't particularly scholarly, and so they just said things like, Horus was born on December 25th. These people were when they aren't. But then Zeitgeist quotes those inaccurate sources to use its sources. So first and foremost, that list, if you ever see it, if you ever encounter it, question it immediately because it's not actually accurate. A lot of God things, we don't have their birthdays anyways, one. And two, it would be conspicuous if it was that. Why would they all be born on December 25th? Some of them are born on a winter solstice, which is not December 25th, and most of them don't have a birth date at all. And somehow they've contrived that maybe they are like related to the winter eclipse, and therefore, or not the eclipse, the solstice, and therefore born on December 25th because 25th is close enough to the 21st. In any case, it's not actually the 25th. Most of their virgin births, quote unquote, are not virgin in any sense of the word. We're going to go over that when we talk about a couple specifics. And some of them weren't even contemporary to Jesus' time. For example, the cult of Osiris happened way before Jesus' time, and then it waned in popularity throughout all of the early Christian church, like from minus 30 BC to positive 300 AD. It wasn't a big thing, but they'll use that and say that people stole from it, which, it's conceivable, I suppose, because it existed. Same with Mithraism, Mithra guy that was popular amongst centurions in the Roman Empire, but it was popular post Jesus' time, like post 125, when these theories say that that this cabal got together to make up Christianity. It was around before then in Persia and other places, but it wasn't well known to Romans, so certainly not some hicks that decided to make up a religion, which is, it's kind of unrealistic that they would have. Same with the Hindu deities, like how would they have even known about these Hindu deities? They weren't well known even to us until we modern day got into India, and the British went into India and we actually knew about Hinduism and all that. So the expectations for this cabal are pretty high, that they had the ancient form of Wikipedia and could look up all the different religious beliefs and mix them together. They probably would not have been aware of almost all of these, let alone their details, and been able to cook them up into a Christian religion. I'll go further. So that's the main argument. That's the one you're going to run into. But Zeitgeist, if you actually watch the movie, it brings out a lot. It just throws everything in the kitchen sink at Jesus to see if they can get something to stick. Because not only do they say this cabal probably made Jesus and here's all the gods that look like him, they also say, and the Jesus story has similarities to constellations, because we know ancient people are big into astrology and constellations, and there's a constellation in the sky called Virgo, which can be the Virgin, and for Mary, and there's a constellation group in the sky called the House of Bread. It's a very nondescript constellation, and honestly, it's dubious where the origins of that come from. I might suspect that they actually come from post-Christian tradition, and they name something the House of Bread, because the House of Bread in Hebrew would be Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus. So the Zeitgeist theory is like, okay, so these constellations moved or were like in different positions over time, and so people wrote the Gospels and put in details like he was born of a virgin in Bethlehem to allegorize, in an allegorization of the way the stars moved, so that future generations would be able to understand that constellations moved in the sky. Kind of baffling that you would create the entire gospel to talk about how constellations work, and of course it doesn't hold water for the entire rest of the gospels, right? All the things that Jesus did don't have anything to do with Bethlehem or his virgin birth at all. So it would be a really weird allegory if his allegory for the constellations was just the very first chapter, the first two chapters of some of the Gospels. Some of them don't even mention his birth status or place at all. So it's, again, dubious at best that would be their origin.
And ironically, Jesus was known as the Nazarene, so not even like Bethlehemite.
Exactly. Like everybody knew him as the Nazarene when he was there. He called Jesus the Nazarene, Jesus of Nazareth. So
kids these days.
Yeah. It really, when you actually read the Gospels, if you're familiar with the Gospels and you watch Zeitgeist, you'll just be grinding your teeth because it doesn't make any sense. But if you haven't, if you're just a regular old American who's heard of Christianity, right? You went to church, but you didn't really read the Bible. It suddenly becomes super convincing because it's throwing everything in the kitchen sink to give you the doubt that Jesus ever existed. Not to mention, and we won't go into this here, but actual historicity of Jesus is that all the Romans claimed he lived when he did, and they crucified him. That is, Roman historians. The Jews claimed that he was crucified. Josephus claimed he was crucified. A ton of historians claimed he was crucified. There's no argument in history that he didn't exist at his time. So this cabal, like he never existed, is by secular historians will say it's silly. That's not the argument to take. But for pop, like pop psychologists, these pop atheists will often bring out arguments that aren't sound just because they sound cool and sound like a home run, right? If Jesus is just made up, then Christianity is good to go. You never have to talk about it again. So all that being said, that's the argument. That's how it's posted. Let's go into some of the details and actually explore a couple of those gods, those myths that Christianity supposedly copied. Sebastian, you looked these up because you're the man behind the book or whatever, right? The bookkeeper. Do you want to go ahead and talk about some of these false gods?
I could. What do you want? Where do you think would be best to start? Horus, Mithra, or Osiris?
Let's start with Horus and Osiris, the Egyptians, because that's one that
fair.
people usually pull out.
Fair, yes. The most common one, they say that Horus was born from a virgin. You're gonna find out that that's no, not correct at all. And Osiris, they say that the idea of Jesus resurrecting was copied from Osiris. Barely any connection either. So on Osiris, he's the god of fertility and the dead in Egyptian mythology. So there's that. His death was supposed to symbolize, the new coming, the change of season, all of that. And he's also painted as green. So a lot of fertility motifs behind him. Anyway, the background of his death and his resurrection was that his brother Set coveted his position as ruler, as in his high position amongst the gods in Egypt, and then devised a plan to kill him. Part of the plan was getting him inside a box, which was impressive on its own feat. How do you trick a god into getting inside a tiny box, and then throw it into the Nile and wait until he drowns. So that's how he died. And then his loving wife, Isis, Osiris' wife, who's also his sister, let that sink in for a moment, and found the body. And then the stories diverge here. Some say that then the body there was resurrected for a moment by Isis's magic, so that she could get pregnant. That's some of the stories. Another story would be that Osiris was killed, and then the body was cut into many pieces, and then Isis puts them back together, except for his penis. So then she makes a penis out of thin air, and then gets impregnated from that. And then Horus is born from that. So neither a resurrection in the sense that Jesus was raised from the dead, nor a virgin birth for Horus. The Horus would be the virgin birth. No, she copulated with Osiris. She resurrected him for the purpose of having a child. So no virgin birth there.
Yeah, and I mean to say, so I guess they're getting at that he's that Horus was born of a god, right? Of two gods having sex, but like that's every single god ever.
In Greek mythology,
it's not unique at all. So why would they be claiming that this was the copy for the virgin birth? And then the resurrection again is kind of insane because I guess it is. He's coming back from the dead, but it's not in any way similar to the Christian tradition, right? Not even the reasons for the death, let alone the mode of death or the mode of resurrection or the timing of the resurrection or the reasons for it. So, I mean, as inspired as if we wrote a story today and it had a husband and a wife, we'd be like, oh, inspired by Osiris and Isis. You'd be like, no. It just happens to be a theme that happens a lot.
Well, maybe Game of Thrones, since they
brother
and sister. Yes. But other than that, not that common at all. Another one, and I'll go through this one quick as well. Mithras, who was, as you were correctly mentioning, it was an inspiration from a Persian deity called Mithra. In my opinion, and also with some scholars that I've been listening to, there really is, you can't make that good connection between the Roman Mithra and the ancient pre-Zoroastrian divinity called Mithra in Iran before Zoroaster came, because it's just so different. And also, to add on top of this, there really are not that many inscriptions or writings, in paper, papyrus, on what Mithraists believed in the Roman Empire. There are many Mithraeums, which are their place of worship, like how you go to church. They would have their Mithraeums, and they would just leave nice images on the walls, maybe some inscriptions, some ranks of the order in the secret. It was a secret society mostly, so initiation and whatnot. They had ranks, they had order of supper, they had a liturgy, but other than that, not really any information on exactly what they believe. They have statues that we really don't even know what they represent. They have anyway. I will not get carried away. So for Mithras, they would associate that Mithras had 12 disciples, and thus Jesus was copied from these 12 disciples, which is Mithran in the Roman Empire came after Jesus. So number one, there's that. And the disciples, quote unquote, are the 12 constellations that are surrounding Mithras. And I would hardly call stars, just chilling there.
Well, and the most embarrassing part, I think, about these quote-unquote studies of Mithraism or other ancient religions is that they aren't, these ones in particular that are compared to Jesus, I should say, is that they aren't studied from an objective perspective. For instance, these Mithra halls, I'm reading what they're called, the gathering halls that they hold these Mithra worship services, like you said, Sebastian, would have come about post-Jesus anyways. So it's hard to say that they copied the church. In fact, it's hard to say the church copied them, considering they probably copied the church. Now, Mithraism might have its origins post, and that's where they claim that all this came before Jesus. But in any case, the scholarly work done is they look at these churches, these little gathering halls, and they see these 12 constellations surrounding Mithra, and they just say, 12 constellations, 12 disciples, because because the studier is some German from Christian Europe, and he goes, same thing. But Mithraism, first of all, like you said, Sebastian, we don't have any written works from Mithrites themselves, people that worship Mithra. We only have commentaries on what they did from opponents. For example, there's a lot of Christian historians that talk about Mithraism, but only in negative terms and comparing it to Christianity, right? So we don't have any direct stuff from Mithraism. So we all we have is the reliefs on the wall. So to say that we know these are 12 disciples, we don't even know what they might symbolize. Like we know that they're constellations. We don't know if those were like real constellations that got turned into real things that got turned into stars, or if like Mithra had different powers according to what constellations were in season. We don't know. We don't know what it is. It certainly is not comparable to the 12 disciples, which honestly, even in the biblical account, we don't know much about the 12 disciples. Like, does anybody know what Thaddeus did? No, we don't. We don't know much. So it's kind of crazy to say that would have been the 12 constellations.
Yes, and the best part is the virgin birth. And I think, actually, no, you know what? I'll hold back. I have heard that they say that the virgin birth from Mithra is the same as Jesus. I'm like, no. The Zoroastrians would disagree with you, like the two of them that are still alive in this world, and then the Mithraites would disagree with you that it's based on Christianity because or that Jesus even copied, because Mithra was born from a rock, as in there was this rock sitting in a cave, probably the size of a person, and then whoop, out of the rock comes Mithra with, depending on which worship hall you go to, a sword and a lightning, a sword and a staff, or other motifs. And he's already a grown man springing out of a rock. That's exactly how Jesus was born. Am I right?
Yeah, he's also considered like just a god, not a man. Mithra is, to my understanding, he's not called the God Man or anything like that. So I mean, he's
it's
totally
just a deity,
different
yes,
than Jesus. And that, again, the embarrassing part, I think, for those who make these comparisons of Mithra is, once again, where do we get the fact that he even was born from a rock? We don't even know. We don't have a text that says, ancient days long ago, Mithra was born from a rock. We don't have that. We have motifs of him popping out of a rock, but to be quite honest, it could have nothing to do with his origin. It could be like a story that he did in his day, right? Like he was buried in a rock by somebody and broke out. We don't know. So the fact that places like Zeitgeist and other atheists that use this in debate actually say born of a virgin, that's how they describe Mithra, born of a virgin. Mind-boggling. Like, did the rock have sex? I guess not. So it's born of a virgin, right? I guess Adam, the first, man, was born of a very because he was born from the earth. But we would never say that. Like, it's just, again, mind-bogglingly inconsistent. Yeah, from Mother Earth. Yeah,
Virgin Mother Earth.
It was a virgin rock.
And the list goes on and on and on. So again, Zeitgeist will present many lists. Bill Maher has famously done that kind of comparison too. He's a famous atheist comedian. It's not an uncommon, again, pop atheist argument, but true hardcore atheists that go out and debating don't use this debate topic because it's dumb and disprovable instantaneously. Because again, the information is false. Like a lot of them aren't born on December 25th. They're not born of a virgin. And even if you get the stuff right, like Osiris is technically resurrected, it's not. It would be very hard pressed to say that that was an inspiration for the Christian myth. Not to mention the historicity of Jesus' actual place and time that was not disputed during his day. So the fact that if he was in fact a myth, everybody, all the Jews would have been like, yeah, that's not true. Just like they did with all the other myths. The Jews were perfectly happy to say your gods are fake. That was kind of their thing, right? So they could say Jesus never existed, but that's not what the Jews said. The Jews discredit him and say that he was born of a whore, but they don't say that he was never born, or that he was born of a rock, or any other strange things. So it is, again, mind-boggling, unhistorical to say that these myths had any influence on Christianity. In fact, it might be the other way around, considering they become popular again at a time when Christianity starts dismantling regular pagan religions. The Roman Empire kind of scrambled culturally to find competing religions that were as strong and had such a message as Christianity. So basically the polar opposite of the whole Zeitgeist theory that the disciples, this cabal, had to cook up a religion that was popular. Other people were cooking up religions that were popular in response to Christianity. Before Christianity, there wasn't a need for a super popular cult, because the cult of the state was totally fine. You know, you have whatever gods you want, worship whatever you want.
Mm-hmm. And I'll throw it out there because I think it's interesting, something that I think is meaningful to keep in mind for Mithra in particular. Some say that it came from the east and then made into the Roman Empire from some legionnaires. I actually am of the mind of some scholars that it probably originated in Rome, really, because there are more Mithraeums in the Western Roman Empire than there are actually in Syria or in the East. Like there's like just embellishing here, like 2 or 3 in Syria and Egypt area, but there are hundreds in Bosnia, Italy, England, for crying out loud, Germany, France. So clearly, I would say it started in Rome as a response to Christianity, like all these cults, the cults of Isis too, an Egyptian goddess. So these were coming into fashion later in the 1st century, maybe even early 2nd century. So definitely no continuation from some ancient stuff. Even the Egyptians would have scoffed at the cult of Isis because it was so different on how they had worshipped Isis before. It was like a fashion thing that the Romans were doing. So like secret Masonic societies type of stuff. So no, definitely not a continuation from ancient times.
So again, a whole list of gods, all of them would be similar if we went through them all. There's, again, a lot, so we're not going to go through them all, but they all sound like that, right? Just incomprehensible. Why didn't we put that on the list, except the fact that they wanted to do a hit piece on Jesus? Let's talk about the actual prophecies of Jesus and why my argument, putting aside the historicity of Jesus, putting aside the fact that these comparisons are absolute nonsense, if they weren't nonsense and Jesus' historicity was actually disputed in history, say both those things were true, is it reasonable that a cabal of people would have been able to cook up the idea of Jesus as a synthesis of all those different religions in the first place? We would say no, because Jesus is the promised Messiah. If you've been around the block a couple times, you'll know that Jesus is called Messiah, Jesus Messiah. He's the prophesied Messiah of Judaism, which is an ancient religion in and of itself. And the prophecies about the Messiah were from a long time ago, pre most of the religions they're talking about, save for some dubious claims. Like some say that he's a copy of Buddha. Jesus is, because of the one line where Buddha says, the golden rule, do unto others as you haven't done unto yourself. And they're like, oh, there it is. Jesus summed up in one sentence. They must have, he is Jesus. Surprising. I think Buddha also tells you to meditate and be nice. And again, maybe Buddha is a copy of Gandhi, because maybe Buddha never existed, because Gandhi said be nice and he fasted and other things like that. I mean, it's ridiculous. In any case, let's talk about the prophecies that predicted Jesus coming way before to assure us that the character of Jesus, right? Again, we say he's the historical Christ, but even if you doubt this promised Messiah that Jesus fulfilled was set in the things that he needed to do from way long ago. So you couldn't have really cooked up this religion in a way you liked, because it had to fulfill the messianic prophecies. What are some, Theodore, do you have some messianic prophecies that we can talk about that predicted Jesus?
No.
I'm glad we had you here. Lay it on me. I see your screen.
I guess I'll do that another time. But so Jesus was a real person, obviously, and there are self-fulfilled prophecies where somebody just makes a prophecy of somebody and then that person knows what it is. So in their life, they fulfill it, per se. But one thing people normally don't have much control over is their death. And one thing people have zero control over is their birth. So I'll focus on those. And obviously for birth, it's prophesied that it would be a virgin birth. It was a prophecy that it'd be in a specific location in Bethlehem, and that the individual would be called a Nazarene. And the exact family line of the Messiah was prophesied as well. And it was also prophesied that not only he would be a son of man, but that the Messiah would be the Son of God, the only and firstborn, well, I guess that implied the only Son of God, and also at the right time. So given in the Bible, Daniel chapter 9 and Nehemiah chapter 2, I found that, well, I got this from somebody, but the Messiah would appear no later than 483 years after the year 445 BC.
Mm-hmm. Which is the Babylonian exile, in case you're wondering. So when the Jews are exiled to Babylon, they had this prophecy from Daniel that talked about the length of time until the Messiah, right? And it gives, if you, depending on how you calculate it, it's that 440 years mark. That's the high point. Some people calculate it to less than that. So they cook up something else that might have been fulfilled. But Jews today are challenged by that very fact, because at the time, in Jesus' time, there was a flurry of activity of people claiming to be the Messiah because the time was coming up. Like, it was the time. Imagine, all the Revelation stuff that people cook up. There was a consistent theory that everybody knew, okay, there's going to be, 2021 or in the 2000s to 2010, there's going to be, the end of days. We'd all be looking around for the signs. Well, so were the Jews back then. They were looking around for the signs of the Messiah. So there were many several key false messiahs prior to Christ and then post-Christ, of course. But Christ himself was in that time frame. And so Jews' challenge today is, if Jesus isn't the Messiah, who is, right? So if he was cooked up by a cabal post the time period, right, in like 121 AD, somebody trying to make a religion, they would have had to be, they were constrained into making a god-man, as opposed to Mithra, who's just a god, or Osiris, or Horus, or any of these others who are just gods, right? They'd be constrained to making a god-man because he's promised to be a god-man. He's got a lineage on earth. He has to have the virgin birth, which again, it was actually considered ridiculous, by the way. Other religions didn't have the kind of virgin birth that Jesus had. It was mocked incessantly by the Jews. Again, they called him the son of a whore because they were insinuating he wasn't really virgin born, right? He was born out of wedlock by somebody else that wasn't Joseph. It was mocked incessantly by the Romans. It wasn't a popular thing to put in, but they put it in there because they would have had to put it in there because it's part of the prophecy for the Messiah. You'd think that they would have come up with some other way if they were just trying to make a popular religion. But these are the things that Jesus fulfills because they're part of Scripture. Anyways, go on.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, even going along with that, in the timeline and the false messiahs trying to claim they were, even the Jews asked John the Baptist if he was the Messiah or the prophet who was to come. And John the Baptist ends up testifying for Jesus that Jesus is the Son of God, the one who was to come. So yeah, besides even how Jesus was born, where he was born, how he was raised, the family he was born into, the claim to be the Son of God, and even at the right time, prophecies about his death, one, that he'd be pierced. Psalm 22 says, "They pierced my hands and my feet. I can count all my bones. They cast lots for my clothing." And we know all of that happened. And then going on to none of his bones being broken. Let's see. In Exodus, like the sacrifice of the sheep, the Jews were not supposed to break any of the bones of the sheep that they sacrificed, such that it'd be, I guess, pure and unblemished. So, and Romans normally broke crucified people's bones, or like their legs, break their legs before getting rid of them. But Jesus, in particular, they saw that he died earlier than normal, so they did not break any of his bones. Also, he was lifted up on a pole. In Numbers chapter 21, it says, if a serpent bit any man when he looked to the bronze serpent that Moses made on a pole, then the person lived. So as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up, that whoever believes in him may have eternal life. And then he was buried with a rich man, or buried in a rich man's borrowed tomb. This part of Isaiah 53, that's just a whole conglomeration of prophecies and stuff that we could just read straight through. And then he was abandoned, forsaken, speechless. The Bible says exactly like how he was betrayed, how he went to the cross, and even like his manner in which he conducted himself. And then also that his body would not decay. In Psalm 16 it says, "My flesh also will dwell securely, for you will not abandon my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to undergo decay." And so that's what we see in the resurrection. So even though I didn't really cover any prophecies that he fulfilled during his life and in and after his resurrection, I think we can I'll stop there. But
yeah, well,
you can keep going if you want.
I mean, we've done a whole,
prophecies.
True. If you have any extras, we've done a whole episode on prophecies. So if you want to see it, we've got one in the past if you really want to dive deep into the subject.
Mm-hmm.
But we might throw a few if you have some, Sebastian.
You pretty much touched on all the ones I had in mind, except for Psalm 110, in which is in the priest in the order of Melchizedek, so different than the regular priesthood. So showing, I'm teaching in my church too, so I have a quick aside, but related to this nonetheless. Of all the duties that Jesus fulfills, of priest, king, and prophet, a nice little priest, prophet, and king. So on the prophethood,
Thanks for that insight.
yes, I just had to be done. Yes, doing some.
You have a song that goes with that?
Not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
King, priestly king, something. Keep going.
Drums. Okay.
Not at the moment. So it's a work in progress. So then, sit in the classic. Sit on my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool to your feet. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, "Rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be within the day of battle, arrayed in holy splendor. And your young men will come to you like dew from the morning's womb. The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. The Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his wrath. He will judge the nations, heaping up the dead and crushing the rulers of the whole earth. He will drink from a brook along the way, and so he will lift his head high." One of the quotes from the Old Testament that Jesus says quite often, also in the New Testament, and relates it to himself. He asked the Jews of his day, "Who is this speaking about?" They say, "No, this is the son of David." No, because he's calling him his Lord, so someone above that. And then also the order of Melchizedek. We did a whole episode before on Hebrews of how the priestly duties were fulfilled by Jesus. So if you want more specific information, you can go look that up. And then Isaiah 9. One that I'm trying to memorize, and I've also wrote down from the Septuagint, because why not? Just for the kicks. And for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever. The seal of the Lord Almighty will accomplish this.
Yeah, and so just look at all these prophecies again. If you want to dive deep, you can go to our episode on the prophecies. But if you look at them all, you'll see, and my point here is that if this supposed cabal, or any cabal, even the one that Zeitgeist doesn't talk about, if anyone has the idea, this Da Vinci Code idea that somebody created Christianity, they're stuck from both sides. On one side, if they really wanted to make it a popular religion, why would they have stuck with the Jewish messianic prophecies? Because they're so limiting, like they're so specific. And you can see Jesus' story, if it's made up, fits many of these prophecies to a T. you can't borrow other popular motifs, right? Like you can't borrow Mithra's rock motif or his thing with the bull that he's always holding this bull like trying to kill it. You can't borrow stuff from Hinduism with reincarnation and like coming down as like a 4,000th version of the same god in somebody's body. You can't copy these things because of these restrictions made by the Jewish messianic thing, right? So if you just were looking for a popular religion, you probably would not have picked the messianic properties of a Messiah. You probably would have gone for something more easily not mocked, right? Something strong, a God that didn't die, which again was very embarrassing for the Christian movement. The Romans called it weak and that it was going to ruin the empire because it was full of weak men, making Rome susceptible to invasion. That was the Roman charge, which was an effective charge. It's just Christianity is true, so there's can't get around that. But if you were making a religion, you wouldn't have made it embarrassing, would you? At the same time, if they were trying to perfectly fulfill, if they like gave up on, okay, we don't have to make a super popular religion for the Roman Empire, we just need to make one that catches a good amount of Jews, right? Because the Jews are expecting this prophet, so we're going to write a story that fulfills the messianic prophecies so the Jews will like us. Well, first of all, not a very effective story considering the Jews by and large rejected him as the Messiah, namely because had they added in detail, I mean, hard to add this detail in, but had they added in details that he conquered the earth and the government sat on his shoulders, that's what the Jews were expecting the Messiah to do, was to come and not die, was to come in and rule the world and take over and bring freedom for the Jews and take over the whole world, as we expect Jesus to do in the future and in his second coming. But if you were a liar, a cabal that were making a Messiah, it would be remiss to not leave that detail in, right? So I guess you could call them brilliant people that created the Jesus story and came up with the alternate way that Jesus still fulfills the prophecies without having conquered the earth yet. But again, not very effective considering the Jews rejected it. So for somebody to have concocted this, or a group of people to have concocted this story, they would have had to have been extremely literate on Jewish literature, so probably Jews themselves, but like well-read Jews, not just your average Jew. They would have had to somehow falsify like the fact that Jesus lived, right, and just convinced everyone that he did live 125 years ago or whatever, however far in the future they're writing it, which is skeptical in and of itself, especially for the Jews who were, well used to rejecting false gods left and right. And this very same cabal would have had to get around the fact that everybody was expecting the Messiah to come and conquer the earth, and their story doesn't have him doing that. So it doesn't fit people who are trying to make a niche religion, and it certainly doesn't fit people trying to make a popular religion that sounds like other religions. So the whole Zeitgeist thing that they made it popular, where they were inspired by stories they had heard and they were just like pulling back from their memory, they would have had to been like the religious connoisseur of the world that knew all the different religions of the world, knew all the constellations, also knew all the Jewish texts, and wanted to make a crappy non-popular religion that everybody thought was dumb. Like that. That's what they would have had to make. So it just does not fly. Anything you guys want to say? I plan to jump into like just the origin of how the Bible was made to begin with and show how Zeitgeist doesn't even work at all. But is there anything that you guys want to say before I go into that?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, sorry, Theo. I'll just quickly say, sometimes they associate Mithras with the god Helios, with the sun god. So that's the connection. And then Helios would have been pulling a chariot. Well, compare that to how Jesus comes in riding on a donkey as the king, as a humble king. So unless Mithras was pulled by a bunch of donkeys, pretty much a stretch. So compare those gods, as you were saying, that they're mighty, they're powerful, they are meant to crush and trump everybody, and then Jesus instead, as the king, comes humble. Here comes righteous and victorious, lowly, and riding on a donkey. He will proclaim peace to the nations. His rule will extend from sea to sea and from river to the ends of the earth. So quite a comparison, I would say.
And again, it wouldn't be good for the Jews because they were expecting. Now, if they knew the Bible better than anyone, I mean, nobody was expecting Jesus to come the way he did, and the Jews. But had they known the Bible, they would have known this kind of thing. But the Jews of the day were not expecting a gentle Messiah. They were expecting
They were wanting something more, yeah.
And the Romans and everybody else in the whole free world wasn't expecting a humble king. They were expecting the big boy, somebody like Mithra, somebody like Ashur, or any of the other false gods out there that come and conquer, big kings, powerful kings to come in. So the religion just didn't make any sense. And it wasn't a popular technique at the time either to make some humble servant king. Now, post-Christ. In medieval ages and other things, there are copycat-style Christs, right, that also come in humbly, but they're just that. They're copying the model that works so well with Jesus Christ. It is a unique story. Even if you don't believe it's true, it is unique. It's not a copy.
I guess I was just going to say, in thousands of years of existence, there are bound to be like slight similarities of numbers or concepts, despite them being completely unrelated. And even if Jesus were to have borrowed a few things from fairy tales, then that's further proof that he's the Messiah if he's able to actualize into existence what people had only made up in myths.
I mean, yeah, that's a good point, right? So assuming he's historically there, which obviously we believe that he was historically there, he did things that only myths could do. That's a good point. Like raising from the dead, right? That would be a miracle, yes, and all the other healings. Okay, well then I want to get to my last point. I really think this is the killer of the whole Zeitgeist thing, and the whole reason that it's baffling that it has even caught on the way it has. Because again, maybe it was big in the 1800s and niche groups they really just hated God. But the fact that Zeitgeist, and I keep saying it like it's the origin of all this, it's not. Like I said, it started in the 1800s, and other atheists use this kind of argumentation. But Zeitgeist is the film that popularized this amongst the masses. If you run into people in trailer parks that aren't necessarily, that's very demeaning of me. I don't know. Somebody who isn't well read on history, they don't have to live in a trailer park. They could be in a high rise in New York City. It doesn't matter. Somebody that isn't very well read in history, that is like a nouveau Christian, like they're not Christian, but they're not necessarily hardcore atheists, probably have this whole doubt. They've seen it before, and they would ask you questions about it. That's how I got asked it in college. They wanted me to see this film because they were nouveau sort of cultural Christians, but they had heard these arguments. They didn't know how to respond to them, and they wanted me to ask. So they're a killer for the Zeitgeist movie's presentation, despite all of its inconsistencies and like, oh, maybe it's a copy of Constellations, maybe it's a copy of these thousands of gods, whatever, is that for the Bible to have been a copy of these other gods, it would have had to have been produced by, I assume, an organized cabal, because it knits together well, right? Like the Gospels are consistent. Now, some people claim, oh, they're not consistent because Jesus says he's talking to one demon-possessed person in one Gospel and two in the next Gospel in the same place. I think we'd all narrow down those inconsistencies with telescoping. So it's the same event being described but by different people. So they're focusing on different parts of the story, right? If there's only one demon-possessed man speaking, they write just about the one instead of the two that were present, and one of them remembers both. So that actually proves their historicity of the Gospels, or supports that, I should say. They're so large and consistent, yet distributed separately, that it would have been like the largest operation in history to have disseminated the New Testament, even barring the Old Testament, the New Testament, in the way that they did. For example, the Gospels are all written totally separately and distributed totally separately. There isn't like one Alexandria school that's writing down all these things and is distributing or one guy or one set of people like, okay, we've got a Gospel of Mark, and now we've got one of Matthew, and here's one of Luke, and here's one of John. They're distributed way over time. So like people theorize that Mark was the first Gospel written, and so it would have been distributed maybe in the 50 AD, like at an early point. Matthew would have been second. Again, these are just estimations, but Matthew would have been second, but it would have been like around 70 AD, or maybe like pre-60s. And then Luke would have been around the same time, 70s, 60s, and then John would have been like in the 90s AD. So a large swath of time. Imagine you had a book that was written in 1940, and then the next version of it came out in 1960, and then 1990 and 2000. Like that's a large amount of time for one cabal to be distributing a book. And not only the Gospels, that's just the Gospels, the epistles, all the letters written by Paul and John and Jude and Peter, they're all received from churches, assuming that like they've seen this guy, right? They know Paul, and here's a letter from him. Those churches would have remained in like 125 AD when this supposed cabal would have been cooking up this fake gospel. How would they have lied to, say, the church at Ephesus to say, you guys remember when you received that letter from Paul, right? They would have been like, I don't know what the heck you're talking about. And then they would really go, here it is. Here's the one you received. And here's the other one you received 20 years later about totally different subjects. And here's the people named in it specifically. So it's either cooked up by a cabal, or it's like legitimate letters from Paul. And if it's legitimate letters from Paul, is Paul like in on it? Was Paul like the founder of Christianity? Because there's other players in Christianity that aren't Paul that are also distributing letters, are they part of the cabal? Because they live at totally different times and in totally different places. Once again, I don't even see the logistics of how it could have worked, because the letters are distributed throughout time and throughout space. They're written by different people, a diverse group of people, right? Like from Galileans like Peter and John to erudites and Roman citizens like Paul of Tarsus. If you either say that all of it's cooked up, and if it's cooked up, I don't see how they would have gotten anyone to buy into it, because all those people would have been there to have remembered if it had happened. And if it's not cooked up, but or if it wasn't cooked up entirely, but made by each of the characters that comprise the writers of the New Testament, then once again, how did they coordinate? I don't think any of the logistics line up for Zeitgeist to even happen. I don't understand where this cabal would have come from, when it would have come from, and how they convinced everyone it was true. It just doesn't. It couldn't have happened. Any comments? Do you guys want to fight me like you are the author of Zeitgeist? We just proclaim it dead.
I can't even conceive, because you can clearly tell that there was different levels of accessibility to some epistles, like Hebrews, for example, wasn't as common. So clearly, there was no central authority that was trying to spread papers everywhere. Which, by the way, speaking of which, unlike Islam, the Roman government had a good interest to start killing those people or like silence them because they were usurping authority. So not only are these people don't have any big government authorities or courier system that sponsors them, like in Islam with the Quran, in which it's the Caliph himself trying to get everyone to believe the same book, in the same exact version of the book. So these people are being persecuted or ostracized at the very least. They are small in number. They're in different locations, yet they are in different languages, yet they're preaching the same message in different time, in pretty much the same time period. Also, this is also including the church fathers. Like Clement of Rome, who lived in the 1st century, and then Ignatius of Antioch, who died in the year 130s, around then. They also cite the Gospels and the epistles, so we can reconstruct them of and they match what we have. So it's pretty real. It's reliable. They were produced in an incredible situation back then, mind you, with difficulty. That's what I'm trying to get at. And they're trustworthy on the naming of places, on directions, how to get around. So you might think that's why is that important? It's pretty important, because the places change names all the time, but they get the names right. They get the leaders right. Fake gospels that were invented later by Gnostics and whatnot, they get the names of places wrong. They make up some people, etc. So yeah, no other.
Yeah, and it's a good point. So again, I'm not sure the exact. I would love to hear Zeitgeist or similar people give me an exact theory for what exactly happened. Like, it was a cabal based in Alexandria that distributed these papers, and they were all falsified. But they don't have that, because they know, I think they know, if they did that, we would be able to take that situation and say, here's why it's not true, right? Like, the papers were not distributed from Alexandria. There's no proof that it would have come from Alexandria, whatever. We'd be able to come up with a concrete example of why their theory is totally bogus. Instead, they stay vague. But if they did give me an example, or any of us an example of how exactly it worked, we could show that, like, these early church fathers were quoting the scriptures. So were they in on it? Or are they fake people? Like, there's a lot of questions that arise. So once again, it's not a very solid theory. So in conclusion, if we are confronted, so say you are in a situation where you've got some friends of yours or associates that they've been confronted by this argument that Jesus is so similar to other gods that he's probably just myth. He's just made up, and that's, all of his attributes and actions are all so similar to other religions and constellations and whatever else that he can't possibly have been real. What should our approach be to that friend of ours? In a way that's, of course, sharing the gospel and appropriating that, appropriately witnessing and loving towards that person.
So no backhand slapping?
No backhand slapping, yeah.
Okay. I'll let Theodore go first.
No
Brilliant insight
front-footed kicking.
theory. Chokeholds banned.
Okay. Oh, that's right.
Maybe for other apologetics, but not for this one. Other apologetic styles, you can use chokeholds and kicks and whatever else. I'm buying you time, Theodore. You got any plans here? I mean, I can go if we want.
Yeah, you go.
Time. Okay, so if I was confronted by this, like when I saw the movie, I wasn't prepared. I'd never even heard of this kind of thing before. It was, striking some bells because atheists had used it, but I'd never seen Zeitgeist. My only thing to say was none of it's true. Like Osiris, like these people weren't possibly born on December 25th. So I'm like Wikipediaing up these people, and of course I can't find anything on them being born on December 25th. But I can't say conclusively, like I know that they aren't because I haven't looked it up, but the Wikipedia doesn't even say they were. You'd think it would mention it if it was a well-known thing. In any case, I was kind of baffled at the time, but I think if I were to be asked right now, confronted with these, tell me, Michael, how could Jesus possibly be true? I would ask them gently to explain to me how they think it worked. That way I can have a concrete thing to target, like they say, okay, so all of this evidence that he sounds like a lot of other gods at the time, mean that a cabal made up the story. I would ask them, when do you think they made up the story? How do you think they made up the story? And then you can approach it by going through the actual history of the way the Bible is distributed. Or if they've got some other theory, like I think all the gospel writers were kind of doing their own thing, like making up their own thing and getting along with each other, then I would have to approach it like the consistency of the gospel throughout the letters and all of that. And at the end, I really just want to let the fool speak according to their folly, right? They've got a dumb theory that they heard. Let's have them think it out themselves so that they can realize their own folly. And then immediately, I don't even have to get into like the crazy details of this is exactly how Osiris was born and died. And remember, he didn't have a penis. And I didn't have to get into any of that. I just can go straight and say, see, it's bogus. Here's the real gospel. And then you can go straight into the gospel. Like all men have sinned. You know it to be true that all men have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We all need to turn to Christ to be saved. He's the only one and the only way, the truth, the life, as he says. And anybody who turns to him and believes in him has eternal life and will live and have him pay their payment instead of themselves. Like just go straight into the gospel instead of getting caught up in the muck of, who exactly Ignatius of Alexandria was or whatever, or
as fun as yes, of Antioch. It's a different guy. Yes. Or as fun as the horse myths might be, unfortunately,
they keep going on too. We didn't mention in this podcast. Sebastian was going on and on about like the horse myth. They go crazy. Apparently, Osiris's favorite food is lettuce.
No. Seth's
favorite food is lettuce. Other details that don't appear in the Gospels, surprisingly. Whose favorite food is lettuce? Is this a bunny? Whatever. We're not even going to get into that. Sorry. I bought you all both time. Any other insights on how you would respond to this, or are you just similar ways?
Yes. I would add on to it, and it's probably because this is my current passion project as I'm doing in my church. I think that it would be worth if they say about how can we even trust Jesus? Well, let's go into it. Jesus isn't just a brand new improvised idea by some random Jews in the first century. There's actually a whole sequence of events leading to his arrival on planet Earth. And you can go in with showing the prophecies starting from Genesis, like the seed of the woman will crush the head of the serpent. No, going there. You can go into some Christophanies, which I am excited to go into, meaning that God shows up on Earth before Jesus, like with Abraham and his camp. I would hold that is God because the person is identified as Yahweh. So
he is God. You mean Jesus? Yeah. Of course, it's God, right?
Yes. The second person of the Trinity. That's what I meant. Sorry. And then, if you have a favorite prophecy, you certainly can memorize those. Remember them, or at least be very good at paraphrasing them if you can't memorize them. Like in Isaiah 9, for example, I really like that one, or in Micah 5, and then look how Jesus fulfilled it. These are very specific. You really can't just create a character that magically fits into all these prophecies and then say, oh yeah, he existed, because otherwise people in the first century will call you out for that. You say, oh, clearly you're pulling this from your armpits. So, and the Jews didn't do that. Josephus names the brothers of Jesus. But that will be my approach if someone starts questioning Jesus. And I think it is powerful because not only does it show how Jesus fulfills this, but it shows the consistency from beginning to end of the Bible versus other religions like Egyptian mythology, in which there's gods being put in boxes. Someone likes lettuce a lot. look into it, and then it'll be permanently disturbed by that. But yeah, you can compare that to Judaism and Christianity and see how distinct they are.
Any wrap-up words, Theodore?
Nah.
All right, we've said enough. All right. Well, thank you. This has been The Found Cause, where we found our cause and serve that same Lord Jesus Christ that we advocate for. I've been Michael, the man sitting on the table, and to my left has been
Theodore sitting on the couch.
And to my right has been
Sebastian sitting on the recliner.
If you want to see the rest of our episodes, you can go to foundcause.podbean.com and download them all for your listening pleasure. That's audio only, though, so you won't get to see me and all my wonderful self sitting on the table, or Theodore on the couch and Sebastian on the recliner. So if you want to see the rest of our episodes in video, you can go to facebook.com/foundcause, or go to YouTube and look us up there. We're also on Spotify and iTunes and any place you find your podcast. So until next time, we talk about something completely different. Thanks for listening. See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.